Hi, and welcome to another episode of Starship Gaming. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we release more awesome videos. Now let's jump right into today's topic. Today we are going to review the Lost World Jurassic Park for the Sony PlayStation, or the PS1. Now this game is an absolute favorite of mine. It was one of those games that I remember playing fondly when I was a kid. And it was absolutely one of my most favorite games. I can't emphasize that enough. I remember playing this constantly, more than any other game for a period of time. And I actually didn't buy it when it came out. If you saw in the previous episode, I actually bought this. Well, it goes along with my pawn shop story if you've already seen it. It was one that I actually bought from that pawn shop in the last episode. If you haven't seen that last episode, go back and watch that whole thing. It's a pretty interesting story. Plus, it would add on to your listening experience here, and you'll get some backstory on that. So yeah, this was one that I constantly played when I was a kid. So it is based on the movie of the same name that came out in 1997. And it came out in late 1997. I believe it was August of 97. And there was actually a port of it for the Sega Saturn, which some have told me the Sega Saturn port kind of looks a little bit better than the PlayStation port. I don't know. I've never played the Saturn port myself. I'm looking forward to someday. And then, of course, there was a version of the Lost World Jurassic Park made for Sega Genesis. Of course, it is a completely different game from what the PlayStation and Sega Saturn versions are. The Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 1 versions are pretty much identical, except I will tell you here in a little bit about another edition of the game that was released for PS1. But there was actually a version released for Genesis. We'll probably do a review on it one day. I don't own it currently, but I have played it several times. I actually do remember going to a friend's house and we played through it like several times, maybe 5 or 6 occasions back when I was growing up. And I actually got to play it again recently, like in the past year. But we'll talk about that version in a future episode. So today we're going to talk about the PS1 version. So it very extremely loosely follows the plot of the movie. It's basically, I guess you could say, an action platformer. Well, not really a platform, but it's a 3-dimensional side-scrolling game, pretty much. When you start the game, you start off as a little compy, and you basically build up to different creatures. For example, the creatures are the compy, the velociraptor, the human hunter, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then human prey, which the human prey is actually Sarah Harding. So the game very loosely follows the plot of the movie. And I mean extremely loosely. The only resemblance of a plot in the game being similar to the movie is the ending. And even that is the ending is very loosely inspired. And if you manage to complete the game, you get a little message at the end by Jeff Goldblum himself as his Ian Malcolm character, where he congratulates you for playing the game, and then he tells you, don't play the game, get out. Get out of the house, blow the stink off and all that jazz. And he basically just says, hey, you just wasted $59 or $49 or whatever on playing a video game just for me to tell you that you're lazy and you stink. That's pretty much what it does. And I think it's hilarious that years later they actually asked Jeff Goldblum if he remembers filming that portion for the video game. I can't remember exactly what he said. I think he said he somewhat remembered it. There's an interview about it, I'm sure. Somebody a couple years ago asked him, and I think that's really cool because Jeff Goldblum is an awesome guy. He's one of my favorite actors. I mean, along with Harrison Ford and, a bunch of other people. But I just thought that was really cool. And quite honestly, the game is an absolute masterpiece. I would put it in the top 10 list of best PS1 games. I would probably put it at number 4. Of course, a lot of people would argue with that. Oh, you got to put the RPG games in the top 5. And I'm like, nah, not everybody likes RPGs. Not every RPG is a masterpiece. I mean, other than the Final Fantasy games. But, yeah. And, there's a few others. But if we're going to be realistic and go with a mainstream list, ones that were readily available to the public. Like, for example, in the top 10 list, I would have The Lost World, Jurassic Park, and A Bug's Life, and even Disney's Tarzan, because those games were just plain awesome. But of course, in that top 10 list, you would also have Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, along with Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, and maybe Crash 2. I'd probably put Crash 2 before the first Crash Bandicoot. Crash 2 was absolute genius. But if I had to give this a rating, if you've watched my past PS1 reviews or my reviews in general, I give a rating on 1 to 5. I actually did talk about this game in a previous episode when I reviewed all the Jurassic Park games in general, but I didn't go in detail about them. I would actually give this a 5 out of 5, which is a lot of people would disagree, but I think 5 out of 5. I think this is a masterpiece. It's basically one of the top 10 best PS1 games. Yeah, it's difficult, but I think it's something that you can sit down and play for an hour or two and actually enjoy. You can basically play it in an entire sitting. But honestly, the graphics are pretty good. Some levels hold up today better than others. Of course, you can tell it's aged. But the models of the dinosaurs themselves is actually pretty decent, especially for like the Tyrannosaur. And then you have to look at the environments. The environments still hold up pretty well in terms of platformers. I guess you could say it's platforming. Platformers. I would consider it one. But I think it holds up pretty well by today's standards. It honestly, for some reason, reminds me of an arcade game. I'm not sure why, it just does. And it also, the way that it's laid out, like the side-scrolling aspect of it, reminds me of the 2 Jurassic Park games that were released on the Sega Genesis, Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park Rampage Edition. Now, there was also a special edition of The Lost World Jurassic Park. And the reason that it exists, or so I've been told, I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but I'm pretty sure it is. For the greatest hits version, also dubbed the special edition, it basically toned down the difficulty from the original release of the game. What I have heard is that the original release of The Lost World Jurassic Park for PS1 and the Saturn version, but there was never a special edition released for Saturn, fans complained that it was too difficult. I'm guessing mostly kids. That's probably, I'm going to say 90% of the audience that played this game, kids under the age of 12. And there was complaints that it was too difficult, so in 1998, they reissued the game under its greatest hits as a special edition. It toned down difficulty. Not only that, but at the beginning, it added a level where you play as the Tyrannosaur, and it takes place in 1993. I'm guessing it takes place shortly before the events of Jurassic Park the movie, because it has the T-Rex. He's out of containment and he's gobbling up engine workers. So I'm guessing that this is like, shortly before the events. Of course, it's non-canon and they more or less just threw it in there. It was probably originally a deleted level from the original game, and it's really short. You could blow through the level in like a minute, but it is super short, and they threw that in there for, I guess, some added, some padding. to call it a special edition. So, in the comments down below, tell me, have you ever played the Lost World Jurassic Park for PS1? What did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Let me know. And if you haven't played it, does it look like something that you would want to play? Or, I should say, does it sound like something that you'd want to play? So, let me know in the comments down below. So, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we release more awesome videos. And until next time, I will see ya.